Good afternoon, everyone.
Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, the Minister of Transport, Omar Alghabra, and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health, Jennifer O'Connell. Depuis le début de la pandémie,
Since the beginning
mon
of the
équipe
pandemic,
ministérielle et moi
my
travaillons en
team
étroite
of ministers and
collaboration
I have been working
avec
very
eux
closely
et leurs équipes.
with their
En tant que
partners and
membre du
teams.
Conseil des ministres, je
As a
constate
member of
aussi
the cabinet,
régulièrement l'expertise
I
et le dévouement
regularly
des
see
fonctionnaires
that
fédéraux
federal
comme
public
ceux que j'ai
servants
le
are
plaisir
highly
de
dedicated
côtoyer
and competent.
quotidiennement.
I get to see their
En cette
work
période
every day.
difficile et incertaine,
During these
ils se
difficult
sont
and uncertain
dépassés
times,
pour fournir des
federal public
services
servants
critiques aux
have gone
Canadiennes
above and
et aux
beyond to
Canadiens
offer
à une
critical services
vitesse
to Canadians
sans précédent.
at an
And
unprecedented
as
speed.
vaccines became readily available, public servants stepped up yet again with their arms out among the many Canadians who have already been fully vaccinated. That is so important because we continue to face more transmissible and more dangerous variants of concern. Les autorités de santé publique
Public health
continuent de nous
authorities
dire
continue to
que les
tell us
vaccins
that
sont de
vaccines
loin
are
le
by
meilleur moyen
far
de mettre
the very
fin
best way
à cette
to put this
pandémie.
pandemic behind
Nous le
us.
savons.
We all
C'est
know it.
pourquoi nous vous
That's
annonçons
why today
aujourd'hui
we're
que
announcing
nous
that we
exigerons
will be
la
requiring
vaccination
vaccination
dans la
within the public
fonction
service,
publique fédérale.
the federal
We know
public
that
service.
vaccines are the best way to end this pandemic. That is why we are announcing today that we will require vaccinations in the federal public service. Et nous lançons un appel à toutes les industries
We are also
sous
calling on
réglementation
all
fédérale
federally regulated
et évidemment
industries and
aux
sectors,
sociétés d'État
and we are
et aux
also calling
agences
on crown
fédérales
corporations
de faire
and
de
federal
même
agencies to
immédiatement.
follow suit post-haste.
Étant le plus important
The
employeur
government of
au
Canada
pays,
is the
le
largest
gouvernement du
employer
Canada
in the
veut
country.
faire de sa part
As such,
pour
the government
protéger
of
les
Canada wants to
fonctionnaires
do its part
et
to
leurs
protect
communautés
public
où ils
servants
vivent
and the
et
communities
travaillent
in
au
which they
Canada,
live and
et
work,
ça aussi
both
partout
in
dans le monde.
Canada and abroad.
Il s'agit aussi d'encourager fortement
We
les
also,
autres en
with this
exerçant
move,
un
want to set a
leadership
strong
évident
example for others
fédéral dans les
by
secteurs
acting
que
as
nous
leaders
réglementons
federally in
aussi.
the sectors
Tous
that we
ces
regulate.
efforts visent à aider le Canada
These efforts and
à
actions
atteindre la couverture
aim to help
vaccinale
Canada
dont nous avons
reach the
besoin
vaccine coverage that
pour
we need
ouvrir
in order to
l'économie,
reopen the
pour la
economy,
garder
in order to
ouverte
keep the economy
et pour
rolling,
protéger les millions de
and
personnes
in order to
non
protect
vaccinées
the
qui
millions
sont
of
vulnérables
unvaccinated people
aux
who are
infections.
vulnerable to
Nous nous
COVID-19.
concentrons sur la santé publique
We are
des
focusing
Canadiens
both on the
et
public health of
sur le
Canadians
soutien
and
de la
on
résilience
supporting
économique de notre
economic
pays.
resiliency in
La
Canada.
prochaine étape consiste à
The next
mobiliser
step will be
nos
to
principaux
mobilize and
intervenants,
engage with our main
notamment
partners,
évidemment les syndicats, les agents
notably bargaining
négociateurs,
agents
avec
and
lesquels
unions.
nous avons
We
travaillé en
have worked side by
étroite
side with them
collaboration tout
throughout
au
the
long
entire
de
pandemic.
la pandémie. Nous collaborons avec
We are
eux
working
et
with them
d'autres
and with other
partenaires de la
partners
famille fédérale
to
pour mettre au point les
finalize the
détails
details
de cette
of this
robuste
very strong
approche
federal
fédérale
vaccination
en
approach.
matière de vaccination. Nous étudierons notamment comment cette
We will
exigence
study
sera
and
mise
look
en
into
œuvre
the
au
ways
moyen
to
d'une preuve
implement
de
this
vaccination
requirement
et par
through
d'autres
proof of
moyens de
vaccination
protection
and
au
through
besoin.
other
We will
protecting
take the
tools if
time
necessary.
needed to get this right, but we will also act very quickly. The next step is obviously to engage our key stakeholders, including unions, bargaining agents, to build the details of this strong, mandatory federal vaccination plan. We are targeting implementation early this fall, and we will obviously communicate the details as this work unfolds, but this work begins immediately. The Government of Canada has a large workforce and a large reach to help in the fight against COVID-19. It is both our opportunity, but also our duty to lead by example. Nous avons le devoir d'assurer la
It
sécurité
is
de
our
nos
duty
employés
to guarantee the
et de ceux
safety of
qu'ils
our
servent,
employees and
ainsi
those
que de
they
leur
serve,
communauté aussi.
as well as
C'est
to
ce que nous
protect their
faisons
communities.
avec l'annonce
And that is
aujourd'hui.
exactly what we're doing through
Je
this
vous
announcement
remercie,
today.
and
I
now I'm
thank you.
happy to turn over the microphone to my friend and colleague, the Minister of Transport, Omar Alghabra. Omar.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. Bonjour à tous. I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Canadians have demonstrated strength and resilience throughout the pandemic and have shown extraordinary commitment to following public health advice. Canada's vaccination rate is among the best in the world. But to protect ourselves and each other from the virus and its variants, we must do better. We need to reach as many Canadians as we possibly can. Today, we are announcing that the Government of Canada intends to require vaccinations across the federal public service. Following this example, we also expect that Crown corporations and other employers in the federally regulated sector will also require vaccination for their employees for the same compelling reasons. Furthermore, as soon as possible in the fall and no later than the end of October, the Government of Canada will require employees in the federally regulated air, rail, and marine transportation sectors to be vaccinated. In addition, the vaccination requirement will also extend to certain travelers. This includes all commercial air travelers, passengers on interprovincial trains, and passengers on large marine vessels with overnight accommodations, such as cruise ships. Of course, for those few who are unable to be vaccinated, accommodation or alternative measures, such as testing and screening, may be determined in each situation to protect broader public health by reducing the risk of COVID-19. I've heard from employers in the federal transportation sector who are concerned about protecting their employees. Workers are counting on their employers to develop robust vaccination policies for their workplaces. Vaccine requirements in the transportation sector will help protect the safety of employees, their families, passengers, their communities, and all Canadians. And more broadly, it will hasten Canada's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We have seen how devastating COVID-19 has been to our transportation and tourism sectors. We must protect the hard-won gains made by Canadians. Canadians deserve to feel confident when traveling that the environment around them is safe. We need to regain public confidence in travel. Such confidence will give a boost to our industry. Being vaccinated makes the workplace and travel safer for everyone. We will work closely with key stakeholders, operators, and bargaining agent in particular to develop a practical approach to requiring vaccines in these sectors as quickly as possible. As I noted, the health and safety of Canadians will always be our first and most important priority. La santé et la sécurité des Canadiens
The health
sont
and
notre
safety of
priorité.
Canadians will always be
And
our
lastly,
first priority.
To my fellow Canadians, next time you get on a bus to go to work, hop on a ferry, take a train or fly to another Canadian city, or any number of other industries public service employees are part of, remember, they work hard to serve you every day. Let's protect ourselves and each other by getting vaccinated. I want to thank Canadians for their continued cooperation in the face of the global COVID-19 pandemic. Canadians want to get back to normal as quickly as possible. Those who get vaccinated will pose less risks to themselves and their fellow Canadians. Because of this, they will be able to benefit from additional easing of public health measures. To those who have not been vaccinated yet, know that vaccines are our best way out of this pandemic. please go get your shot. We're not quite there yet, but by continuing to work together, we will end this fight. Thank you. Merci. And now I will ask my friend and colleague, Jennifer O'Connell, to take the mic.
Thank you, Omar and Dominic, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking Canadians for their commitment to fighting COVID-19. We know vaccines are key to beating COVID-19. And while we still need to practice public health measures, particularly in crowded and indoor spaces, vaccines have allowed us to reconnect with loved ones and return to many of the activities missed during the pandemic. They are also essential to ensuring the safety of our employees. And this is why the federal government is committed to protecting the health and safety of all Canadians. Vaccine requirements across the public service reflect that commitment. Required vaccination also sets an example for everyone, including other public and private sector employers. This will help keep our country safe and contribute to stopping the spread of COVID-19 and its variants. As we face the fourth wave of this pandemic in Canada, it is more important than ever to bring down COVID-19 infection rates, and we have enough doses to fully vaccinate every eligible person in Canada, and it is important that everyone does their part to increase the vaccination uptake. So if you haven't been vaccinated yet, I urge you to make a plan to do so. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it back to Minister LeBlanc.
Jennifer, thank you very much. And Jean-Sébastien, over to you. We're obviously, all three of us, happy to take questions now. Jean-Sébastien, à vous.
Over to you, Jean-Sébastien.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Donc, tel que
Thank you
mentionné,
very
nous
much,
allons maintenant
Minister.
débuter la période de questions.
We will now take
Ministers
questions.
and the Parliamentary Secretary will now be happy to take your questions. As usual, it will be one question and one follow-up per reporter. Donc, comme d'habitude, ça va être une
As usual, there
question
will be
et un
one question
suivi
and one
par
follow-up question
journaliste.
per reporter.
And I will now hand it over to the operator for the first question. Donc, je vais maintenant passer la parole
I will now
à
hand it over to
l'opérateur
the
pour la
operator for
première
the first
question.
question.
Merci, thank you.
Thank you.
Please press star 1 at this time to ask a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour
Please press
poser
star
une
1
question.
now to ask a question.
The first question is from Nicole Thompson of the Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks, ministers. I'm wondering what will happen to the federal employees who choose not to get vaccinated.
So it's Dominic LeBlanc. I'll be happy to offer some comments, and if my colleagues want to add something, I would obviously hope they do. This is a mandatory requirement for the federal public service. Obviously, there will be certain individuals for medical reasons that will not be able to be vaccinated, and the appropriate officials will obviously work with them to ensure that that the appropriate measures are in place for those, as I say, who medically cannot be vaccinated, cannot accept a vaccination. But we expect the federal public service to want to comply with this mandatory requirement. We obviously, many people across the government of Canada have worked long days and many weekends precisely to help bring vaccines to Canada, to distribute them to provinces and territories, to work with provincial and territorial authorities to distribute these vaccines. So the government of Canada has been focused on vaccination and obviously believes, as do so many people that work with us, that this is the best way to end the pandemic and to allow for the economy to safely remain open. So we expect compliance from the federal public servants, and we'll obviously work with the appropriate bargaining agents to ensure that there can be the best way possible to ascertain these vaccination requirements. But we'll do so expeditiously. We're going to move very quickly to get this done. Maybe Jennifer or Omar want to add something?
Let me start and then see if Jennifer wants to add something. in my former role as Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister for Public Service Renewal, I had the privilege of engaging and working with so many public servants across the entire government. And now in my role as Minister of Transport, I've really seen firsthand the commitment and the dedication that public servants have had for serving Canadians. And my sense is that public servants are supporting and applauding this commitment, and they all want to ensure that they have a safe workplace. Of course, there will be some requirements for accommodation based on legitimate reasons, and those will be worked out. But my sense is that public servants are very much applauding and supporting this initiative.
I will add, this is Jennifer O'Connell, I'll add that millions of Canadians have already stepped up to receive their vaccines, and that includes many public servants. So we thank them for doing so. We know vaccines are safe and effective, but as my colleagues have already pointed out, this is about ensuring as an employer that we also are creating safe workplaces for our employees and making sure that employees feel comfortable and safe going to work. And as it's already been said, of course, there will be accommodations for people who cannot receive the vaccine for medical reasons, but this is yet another step for those individuals who can't receive that vaccine to ensure that they themselves are in a safe workplace to help that they're not more vulnerable and are able to, again, have a safe workplace. So millions of Canadians have stepped up, and we just want to ensure that we go one step further to ensure that we are leading or taking the leadership role in this country to ensure that all employees feel safe going to work.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yes. But what about those who are able to get vaccinated but decide for, philosophical or religious reasons? I mean, maybe not religious, but who don't believe in vaccination. What will happen to those who choose not to get vaccinated?
But again, those will be cases that will be dealt with individually by the appropriate public service managers. But what we're saying to the federal public service is this is now a mandatory requirement to go to work in a federal workplace or to work for the government of Canada. And Omar, I think, outlined other federally regulated jurisdictions in which we will be also mandating this requirement. We expect the Crown corporations and federal agencies will also come to the Treasury Board with their plan to ensure that their workplaces are also safe. So we're not focused on those questions. We're focused on how to properly ensure that proof of vaccination is tendered by the public servants who have been vaccinated to work with unions, bargaining agents, and others. But public service managers will also be in a position to deal with employees that decide not to respect the mandatory requirement.
Thank you, Minister LeBlanc. And I will now hand it over to the moderator for the next question. Donc, excusez-moi, pas modérateur, opérateur, à vous pour la
Operator,
prochaine
over to you for the next question.
Merci.
Thank you.
The next question, la prochaine question est de Claudie Côté de TVA.
Next question,
À vous la
Claudie
parole.
Côté from TVA.
Bonjour. Peut-être
Question.
une spécification. J'aimerais
Hello.
savoir
I'd like
quand
clarification about
la
something,
vaccination va
please.
devenir
I'd like to
obligatoire.
know
Vous n'avez
when
pas donné
vaccination
d'horizon
will
de temps
become
pour
required.
le
You
moment.
didn't give us
Et
a
est-ce que
timeline
vous
yet.
connaissez le taux de vaccination en ce
Also,
moment chez
what
les
is the
fonctionnaires
current
fédéraux?
vaccination rate among federal public servants? Do you happen to know that?
Peut-être
Answer.
pour les industries
Minister
ou les
LeBlanc.
secteurs, par exemple, de
Well,
transport, que mon
for some
collègue le
industries
ministre
and
Alghabra a
sectors, for
décrit
example,
tantôt, il a
transportation,
clairement
as
dit
my
qu'au
colleague
plus
Minister
tard, à la
Alghabra
fin
just spoke
octobre,
to, he
nous
said
allons
that this will
prendre des
take effect
mesures
no later than
réglementaires
the end of
nécessaires
October. So no
pour
later than
s'assurer
the
que
end of
ces
October,
employés sont proprement
regulation
vaccinés.
measures will
On
be
ne va pas attendre,
enforced in
évidemment,
order to ensure
pour
that
ces
these
dates
individuals are
avant
vaccinated.
d'agir et avant d'obliger
We
ces
will
compagnies d'agir dans ces
start to
secteurs
work with
identifiés
companies
par le
in
ministre des
the
Transports.
sectors named by the
Nous n'avons
Minister
pas
of
pour le moment
Transport.
des renseignements sur le
We
pourcentage de la
don't
fonction
currently
publique
know the
pleinement vaccinée,
vaccination rates
quoique on s'attend que
for
c'est très
federal public
élevé parce
servants.
que,
We
comme
don't
j'ai dit,
know
ce sont
what
bel et
percent of
bien
them are
des
fully
femmes et des hommes qui
vaccinated,
ont travaillé
but
de
we
longues heures
expect
dans
that it's a
beaucoup de cas
very high
précisément
vaccination rate because,
pour
as
amener des
I
vaccins aux
mentioned,
Canadiens.
these
Et
men and women,
d'autres
these employees
fonctionnaires du
have worked
gouvernement du
so
Canada
incredibly
sont
hard
au
to serve
travail
Canadians and
depuis
to
le
help
début
them
de la
get
pandémie.
vaccines.
Si vous êtes un officier
Also,
correctionnel ou
public
si vous
servants have
travaillez
been
dans le
working,
domaine de la
many of
santé
them,
publique,
in
c'est sûr
person
que
since
vous
the
êtes au
beginning of the
travail
pandemic.
depuis le
For
début de la pandémie.
example,
Et
in
ces
some
gens-là
transportation
comprennent comme
sectors
nous que
or
la
in
meilleure façon
healthcare.
de se protéger, mais de
These
protéger sa famille,
employees
de
know, just
protéger
as we
ses
do,
voisins,
that the
la
best way to
collectivité, c'est
protect
de se
their
faire
loved
vacciner.
ones, family,
Mais c'est
friends,
précisément le
communities
travail que le Conseil du
is to
Trésor
get
va faire
vaccinated.
avec les syndicats de la
But of
fonction
course,
publique, avec tous les employés de la fonction publique,
the
au cours des
SCT
prochaines
will
semaines,
work
demander
with
la preuve
the
vaccinale
the
appropriée
Treasury Board
et
will work with the
trouver la
public
meilleure façon
service and with public servants
d'obliger ceux et
in the
celles qui ne
upcoming
sont pas
weeks
vaccinés et qui peuvent être
to
vaccinés
determine how many
de se
people have
faire
been
vacciner.
vaccinated and to
C'est le
help
travail qui
those
va
and
commencer
encourage those who have not
dès
been
la semaine
vaccinated
prochaine.
to do so. And we will get started with this as soon
Justement,
as
qu'est-ce
next
que
week.
vous allez faire avec ceux
Follow-up
qui
question.
refusent de se faire vacciner? On ne peut
What
pas
will you do for
discriminer
those who
là, sur le
refuse
plan
to
de
be
travail
vaccinated?
en fonction du
We
fait qu'on se fasse
cannot
vacciner
use that
ou
as a
pas.
ground for discrimination in the
C'est
workplace.
illégal. Alors, est-ce qu'il va y
That
avoir
would
des
be
mesures
illegal.
d'accommodement pour ces
Will there
personnes-là?
be
Est-ce qu'on va leur
accommodation
demander de passer
measures
des
for
tests, par
those
exemple,
employees who would
sur
refuse?
une base
For example,
hebdomadaire?
will they
Puis
be
simplement, vous
required
n'avez pas
to
répondu,
be
là, outre
tested
le transport pour
on
les
a daily
autres fonctionnaires
basis?
fédéraux, la mesure va entrer en place
And
quand?
you mentioned when this will take effect for those who work in transportation,
pour
but
la
what about
fonction
for other
publique
federal public
fédérale,
servants?
on
When will this take
s'attend
effect for
que
them?
les mesures
Answer,
soient en
Minister
place
LeBlanc.
au plus tard sur
We
l'échéancier
expect that
du mois d'octobre
for
que le ministre
the broader
Alghabra a
public
décrit
service,
pour le secteur, par exemple, des transports.
this
Mais
should
c'est
be at the
précisément
same
le genre de
timeline around
questions que nous
October.
allons entamer dès
This is a
lundi.
good
Le
question.
Conseil du Trésor va
We will start
rencontrer les
discussing this
représentants
and
syndicaux
studying this
des
on
organisations de la
Monday.
fonction publique fédérale au cours de la semaine prochaine.
The
Et
Treasury
nous
Board
aurons
will
au
start
cours des
meeting with
prochaines semaines
unions and
des précisions
public
quant
service
à la date
representatives as
où
soon as next week.
la
We will thus
vaccination
very soon have
mandatée va
more
rentrer en
details
vigueur.
regarding the timeline of when this
Mais comme nous
vaccination will
avons
become
dit,
mandatory.
il y aura des circonstances pour des gens, par exemple, pour des raisons
As
médicales
we've mentioned,
qui ne peuvent pas
there
être
will
vaccinés.
be
On va
some
trouver la meilleure
exceptions. For
façon de les
example, those
accommoder.
who, for
Comme
medical
Mme
reasons,
O'Connell a
cannot be
bien dit, la meilleure
vaccinated. We will
façon
find
aussi
ways to
de leur
accommodate them.
protéger, c'est de
As
s'assurer
Ms.
que les gens
McConnell
avec
said,
lesquels
the best
ils
way to
travaillent
protect
sont
them
pleinement
is to
vaccinés.
ensure that the people around them
Et
who
que
work with them are
nous
fully
avons
vaccinated.
entièrement confiance que les fonctionnaires du gouvernement du Canada et
We
ceux et
are
celles qui travaillent pour
confident
les
that
sociétés de la
federal
couronne
public servants,
aussi
as well
vont
as
respecter
employees
cette
of Crown
exigence,
corporations,
mais
will adhere to this
les
requirement.
responsables de la fonction publique dans tous les ministères auront
And
les outils
those
nécessaires pour
who
s'assurer
manage
que les gens
various
sont pleinement
government
vaccinés.
groups and agencies will have the tools to ensure that people are fully vaccinated.
Merci, Monsieur le ministre. Donc, opérateur, à vous pour la prochaine question. Operator, it's you for the next question.
Merci, thank you. The next question is from John Paul Tasker of CBC News. Please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, ministers. Thanks for doing this. For Minister LeBlanc, the Prime Minister was asked about mandatory vaccinations in January. He said that this sort of regime would be, quote, an extreme measure and would have real divisive impacts on community and country. The Health Minister, Patty Hajdu, made similar comments as well, saying that no vaccines would be mandatory. So I guess the question is, what's changed, and why are we seeing this sort of climb down today from past comments?
So I'll offer some comments, and Omar and Jennifer may want to add something, Jean-Paul, but I obviously wouldn't describe it as a climb down. This is an evolution of the government's posture in protecting the health and safety of Canadians since the beginning of the pandemic. We have scientific data, but also real-world evidence on how remarkably effective are the vaccines that have been approved for use by Health Canada. So after months and months of deploying these vaccines literally into millions and millions of Canadian arms, we see how effective they are. We also see what other workplaces and other public service agencies around the world have done. And the Prime Minister asked the Clerk of the Privy Council to prepare options for the government on what a mandatory federal public service vaccination plan would look like. And that is exactly what we are announcing today. So it is very much a continuation of our government's efforts to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes to protect the health and safety of Canadians. We think the Government of Canada has to lead by example. It's the country's biggest employer. We're also asking federally regulated industries, and they are also some of the largest private sector employers in the country, to take similar measures. And we'll be working collaboratively with them over the coming weeks as well. We see this as, frankly, a very important step, particularly with the Delta variant, for example, being more transmissible. Fully vaccinated Canadians are much, much more effectively protected than those that aren't. So this is a continuation of that effort that began, obviously, in March of last year. Omar or Jennifer may want to add something.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. I'll just add to what you said, is that, from the beginning, our government has been focused on working with the provinces, on supporting our frontline health workers, on providing vaccine supplies, on providing PPEs. And we're seeing that organically, significant vaccination rates have been produced. Over 81% of Canadians, adult Canadians, have received one dose, and 70% have been fully vaccinated. So we can see that we are, hopefully in the final few miles of this marathon, and we need to do additional measures to incentivize and to close this gap, to continue on this momentum, so we can protect the health and safety of all Canadians, and actually protect as well the hard-won gains to our economy, to our sectors. We cannot afford to risk losing all of those gains.
Perhaps I will just add, I think our government, and certainly the Minister of Health, as I've worked closely with her, the commitment has always been the safety and the protection of Canadians. So wherever COVID has taken us, we have been committed to find the solutions to keep Canadians safe. And we know that vaccines are safe and effective. We also know, with variants of concerns, that vaccinations are still working and provide that level of protection that we need. And that, I think most importantly, vaccines not only keep yourself safe, but they keep your friends and neighbors safe. And that if we want to continue to return to life as normal, if we want to continue to support small businesses, to ensure that they can stay open and thrive and continue to travel and do all the things that I know Canadians are excited to continue to do, the best way to fight COVID-19 and to ensure that we have those opportunities, that we can see our loved ones, that we can hug each other again, is to continue to get vaccinated. So as my colleagues have said, we know that millions of Canadians have stepped up. We are taking a leadership role to not only create safe workplaces for our own employees, but it's also to set the example for Canadians to continue to step up, protect themselves, but protect our country and our communities.
As you might have seen, this message was kind of telegraphed last week when the Prime Minister mentioned it. There has been some opposition criticism of it. David Yerdiga, who's a Conservative MP from Alberta, said forcing federal workers to get a vaccine is a tyrannical idea. He said Canadians deserve the right to choose whether to be vaccinated or not. And mandating vaccines like this is a slippery slope. He's fearful that it could be discriminatory, creating two classes of Canadians, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. What's your response to some of those concerns raised by this opposition MP?
I certainly don't think it'll surprise you that we don't agree with much of what Mr. Yerdiga says. So we'll give that all the weight it deserves. But we have taken a prudent approach, but we've also taken, we think, an effective approach to protect the health and safety of Canadians. We recognize that vaccines are by far the most effective weapon in the fight against COVID-19. And we think the federal public service and Crown agencies and Crown corporations want to do the right thing to protect their employees, but the communities in which they operate. So we expect a constructive but collaborative conversation with bargaining agents, with unions. And frankly, that's been the history of our work with the public service since the beginning of the pandemic. So we are very grateful and recognize the enormous work done by the public servants, including by their unions and their bargaining agents, in finding the best way that we could all serve Canadians in the best way possible during an unprecedented time. So this next step of mandatory vaccinations, we think, is an evolution of that posture to do what's necessary to protect Canadians. But Jennifer or Omar may want to add something.
Yeah, I just want to add, Dominic, you know what Canadians don't want? Canadians don't want to go back to lockdowns. Canadians don't want to go back to travel restrictions. Canadians want to go on with their lives and go back to normal as quickly as possible. And, you know, it's not uncommon for a government to play a regulatory role when it comes to protecting the overall health and safety of Canadians. There are ample evidence of different measures that different levels of government regulate to ensure this protection of the safety of Canadians. And this is another example of how the government has a role, and it also demonstrates how much of a difference it makes, the policies that government make to improving the lives of Canadians. So we fundamentally disagree. Canadians expect this from their government, and we think it is the responsible and the prudent thing to protect the health and safety of all Canadians.
Thank you, ministers. Operator, over to you for the next question. Opérateur, à vous pour la prochaine question.
Merci. La prochaine question est de Catherine Lévesque
Next
de la
question,
Presse canadienne.
Catherine
La parole
Lévesque
est à
from
vous.
La Presse canadienne. Go
Oui,
ahead.
bonjour à vous tous.
Question.
Tout d'abord,
Hello,
avant
everyone.
de poser mes questions, je voulais juste
Before I
rectifier
ask
parce
my
que CIPAC, je
questions,
pense, n'a pas de son actuellement, donc j'ai manqué les
I'd
premières
like to
minutes
say that
de votre
we're
annonce,
not
Monsieur
hearing
Leblanc.
you
Donc,
in
juste pour
French on
résumer,
CPAC,
vaccination
so I missed a few
obligatoire pour les
minutes of
fonctionnaires
your
fédéraux, mais
announcement,
pour
Mr. LeBlanc.
ceux sous réglementation,
So
en fait, les industries
there
sous
will be
réglementation
required
fédérale,
vaccination for
dans le
federal
fond, c'est
public
fortement
servants,
encouragé, c'est ça?
but when it comes to federally regulated sectors, it's strongly encouraged.
Le ministre
Is
des
that correct?
Transports, et merci, je suis
Answer,
content de
Minister
vous
LeBlanc.
donner les précisions parce que c'est important.
Thank you for asking for
Comme vous avez bien
clarification.
dit,
I'm happy
mandatoire
to
dans la
clarify
fonction
because this is
publique
very
fédérale.
important.
On
So
va
yes, as you
travailler
said, this
avec
will
les
be
sociétés
required
d'État du
for
gouvernement
federal
fédéral,
public
les
servants.
sociétés de la
We will
couronne
work with Crown
aussi.
corporations and
Là, on pense
federally
par exemple
regulated
Post-Canada,
sectors. For
Radio-Canada, il y
example,
a d'autres
Canada
sociétés
Post,
d'État. On va
Radio
travailler
Canada,
aussi pour s'assurer qu'eux
and
autres
other
ont
Crown
les moyens
corporations. We will work
de
with
faire
them
qu'est-ce
to
qui est
ensure that they
nécessaire
have the
en
means
termes
to
de
do what is
vaccination de
necessary
leurs
when it comes
employés.
to
Mais le ministre des
vaccination of
Transports a
employees.
précisé les
The
secteurs
Minister
des
of
transports et je
Transport
demanderai peut-être à Omar
did, in
de vous
fact,
donner la réponse
list
précise. On
specific
va mandater par
transportation
règlement
sectors and
dans
types of
certains secteurs
passengers
des
for
transports
whom
la
vaccination will
vaccination
be mandatory.
mandatoire. But
We will be
Omar may be able
regulating
to just
this.
give you the precise details in terms of those federally regulated sectors. We're not talking about Crown corporations. We're talking about private businesses, but regulated by the Government of Canada in certain sectors. Omar, do you want to clarify that?
Yes, Dominic, we are requiring federally regulated employers to adjust their rules to ensure that a mandate is imposed by no later than the end of October. So we will be working with employers on defining the new regulatory framework to ensure that all employees and a number of travelers will be fully vaccinated by no later than the end of October.
OK, parfait. Merci beaucoup pour les précisions. Et
Thank you
puis,
for
les deux
clarifying.
questions. La première est à vous,
Here is my
Monsieur
first
Leblanc.
question
Donc,
for
Monsieur
you, Minister
Trudeau a dit la
LeBlanc.
semaine dernière seulement
Mr. Trudeau
que
said
ce serait,
just last week,
dans le fond, qu'il
in
allait
fact,
mandater la greffière du Conseil privé de se
that
pencher
he
sur cet enjeu.
would
Là, maintenant,
ask
vous avez
the
cette annonce.
Privy
Je me demandais
Council
quand
clerk
est-ce qu'elle
to
a
look into
rendu
this
sa
matter.
décision, puis est-ce que
When
cela a
did the
émis un
clerk
rapport?
of the
Est-ce qu'il y a
Privy
une trace
Council
des consultations
provide
qu'elle a
her
menées?
decision on this? Were there consultations? Was there a
Moi,
report?
j'ai travaillé avec la
Answer.
greffière,
Minister
avec
LeBlanc.
Madame Charette sur
I worked
plusieurs
with
autres
Miss
dossiers. Je sais
Charette,
que c'est
the clerk of the
une
Privy
personne
Council.
rigoureuse qui
I've worked with
travaille
her on many
énormément
files.
fort,
She
évidemment.
is a very
Et je sais
thorough
qu'elle a eu des
individual and
discussions à travers
hardworking
la
as
famille
well.
fédérale
She
depuis
had
que le
many
Premier ministre lui a confié
conversations
ce
about
mandat-là.
this
Et je sais
within
que
the Federal Public
les avis ou
Service.
les options du Conseil privé ont été présentés au gouvernement
The Privy
il y a
Council
quelques jours, et
provided
c'est ça l'annonce
options
que nous faisons aujourd'hui.
to
Le
the
Premier ministre
government,
a pris la décision
and today's announcement
il y a 2
is
jours,
the
et c'est ça
result
l'annonce
of
que nous
that
faisons aujourd'hui.
discussion and those decisions, and
Et
hence
juste
today's
une
announcement.
question pour vous, Monsieur
Follow-up
Alghabra.
question
Pourquoi
for
attendre
you,
à la fin du mois
Mr.
d'octobre
Alghabra.
pour
Why wait
implanter
until
ces
the end of
mesures-là alors qu'on est
October
dans une quatrième vague?
to enforce these measures? The fourth wave is already here.
Thank you for your question. This matter, obviously, today we're signaling to the industry, to federal employees that we want to do it as soon as possible. So the deadline of end of October is a deadline to get us there, but we are starting working on it as of Monday. This is going to require a lot of discussions with stakeholders, with employers, with unions. And we know that they all support this measure. We've spoken, I personally heard from airports, from airlines, from unions that they support this measure. We now need to get to work, define the proper regulatory framework and the proper regimes for this. But end of October is the latest date that we want to get there. We are hoping and aiming to do it even sooner.
Thank you, ministers. Operator, over to you for the last question. Donc, opérateur, à vous pour la dernière question.
Operator, over to you for the last question.
Merci, thank you. La dernière question, the last question, is from Sophia Harris of CBC News. Please go ahead.
Some private businesses which want to implement a vaccination requirement for workers say they're waiting for federal legislation or guidance before doing so. Is that coming at all?
I'll offer a few comments, and maybe Omar or Jennifer can add something. The Government of Canada obviously has jurisdiction in terms of private employers. We're not talking about the federal public service, but in terms of private sector employers, our jurisdiction is in certain sectors of the economy, well known, transport, obviously, banking, telecommunications. Those are the obvious examples of where the Government of Canada has a jurisdiction in terms of those workplaces. So we will also be working with those businesses and their employees to see how they too can ensure that their workplaces are safe and that they're protecting Canadians as well. But a great number of employment relationships are governed by provincial law and provincial labor codes and employment standards legislation in individual provinces obviously vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And those questions we would invite provincial leaders to take up with employers as well. But that's not properly part of our federal ability to legislate or to enact regulatory measures. We can enact regulations under existing legislation, and that's exactly, I think, what Omar is doing, for example, in the transportation sector, but he may want to add something, or Jennifer as well.
Yeah, Dominic, thank you. And just to elaborate or add to what Minister LeBlanc has said, in addition to the importance of what we're announcing today, we're also setting a leadership example to other industries, to other sectors. So yes, we have certain jurisdictions over certain industries, and this is what we're working on starting today. We hope that other sectors will follow our example and set a similar standard for their employees and their workplaces. Ultimately, again, we want to protect against losing all the gains that we've made. We want to protect against going back to lockdowns. We want to protect against losing jobs that we've seen during travel restrictions and other type of restrictions. We want to build on the significant gains that we've made so far. We're almost there. 82% of Canadians have received their first dose. We need to finish this race, and I know we will get there as soon as possible. Thank you.
I'll just add very quickly to what Minister LeBlanc and Minister Alghabra just said, but I think from health perspective, throughout this pandemic, even when it might be provincial or territorial jurisdiction, we have been frankly, we've even working directly with local public health units. So if there are opportunities to provide advice and guidance, the Public Health Agency of Canada, Health Canada, we are there to support them in whatever they need. We have seen recent announcements, even, for example, universities coming out with vaccine protocols. And so although we may not have regulatory jurisdiction over all of these industries, certainly Health Canada and the Minister's priority has been to it has been committed to working with them to provide the best public health advice that we can, and in any ways that we can support provinces and territories in taking the regulatory measures that they need to take in their jurisdictions.
Thank you very much, Parliamentary Secretary and Ministers. Donc voilà qui met fin à cette conférence de presse. That will conclude today's press conference. Merci d'avoir été parmi nous. Thank you for joining us today.
Merci beaucoup.